What's up, guys? This is Christoforou with the Duran.com, and I'm here with Mark Sleboda, International Affairs and Security Analyst out of Moscow. Okay, Mark, Syria is back in the news, and from what I understand and what from many of our viewers understand is that the Russians are involved right now, and the Syrians and the Iranians, they're involved right now in a major bombing campaign. And I'm not sure what else, if there's any movement on the ground or what the situation is right now. Can you give us a brief overview as to what's going on in Syria, especially in Idlib right now?
Yeah, okay. So this is going to be one of the pivotal watershed moments moving forward in Syria. Idlib, at least thus far, will be the biggest battle in Syria thus far, hands down. Idlib is a province in northern Syria, northwestern Syria. It is a hilly and mountainous area, relatively sparsely populated, that is right on the border with Turkey. This province was taken over in 2015 by a coalition of Al-Qaeda, then operating under the name Nusra, al-Nusra, and other jihadist groups. They have kept control of Idlib, and they continue to keep control of Idlib today. Western mainstream media, the experts, the think tankers, have all long admitted that Idlib is controlled by Al-Qaeda. It's now operating under the brand name Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS. Even the United States, even as of last week, Turkey recognizes that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is Al-Qaeda. It's not an ex-Al-Qaeda. It's not a former Al-Qaeda. It is Al-Qaeda, and it is a terrorist organization. U.S., UN, Turkey, even they all agree. There are somewhere between 2 and 3 million people living in Idlib, probably closer after the course of the war to the lower end of that scale. The UN officially announced that there are about 10,000 Al-Qaeda fighters in Idlib. Now, that's probably a low ball, but it's not only Al-Qaeda. When they say that, they're not counting all the other jihadi groups and the Islamist groups that are allied with Al-Qaeda. There are somewhere probably between 30 and 100,000 total. A lot of these are foreign fighters, hardcore jihadists. The Turkestan Islamic Party, Chechens. The other biggest coalition in Syria is the Turkish backed and organized National Liberation Front, they call it. It is Ahrar al-Sham, which is an extremist jihadist group, a splinter group of Al-Qaeda, a regular crowd of head choppers and suicide bombers that has spent the most of the last few years trying to get back and join officially with Al-Qaeda in Syria. And the other group is Al-Zinki, a formerly U.S.-backed group, also radical Wahhabi jihadists who are most famous for filming themselves chopping the head off of a Syrian child and then putting it online as a bit of I guess they thought it was good PR, good messaging there. So Idlib is the last major jihadist stronghold. You will see the Western press all loudly referring to Idlib as rebel hell, rebels, despite the fact that they've long recognized that it is Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda dominates the province. They control the major city. They control the main passage with Turkey, through which supplies are shipped on a daily basis. Food, fuel, ammunition, weapons. Turkey continues to feed and arm these jihadists in Syria and maintain their occupation of this province. And all through the course of the conflict, whenever you are transported on the little magic green buses, and they have arrived in Idlib. Well, for the last month, since the last major victory in the south, the Syrian government has spent a month gathering and marshaling an extra large number of forces to tackle Idlib. This includes, of course, their allies, Russia, Iranian advisors, the Iranian armed popular mobilization units, which even the U.S. was forced to admit played an instrumental role in defeating ISIS in Iraq and East Syria, and some Hezbollah as well. And according to the Guardian, in the last 24 hours, there are actually Kurdish Syrian Democratic forces that have agreed to fight, a small number that have agreed to fight alongside it. Not obviously when you're but CIA-backed Islamist, the Syrian army, Al-Qaeda. They recognize that at the end of the day, that the Islamists, the jihadis backed by Turkey, are not their friends. They are shifting their position closer to the Syrian government, especially after the United States worked out this deal with Turkey to surrender Manbij to Turkish control, and for the Kurds to move out. So this is a gathering of forces around Idlib that is preparing. There are some 30 Russian warships off the coast that will be protecting the coast from a possible U.S. intervention. The U.S. has already been loudly crying, we've seen lots of evidence, quote unquote, which they can't mention, that the Syrian government, on the moment of their victory, is about to launch another chemical weapon attack on the poor civilians of Idlib. And they have threatened to attack, along with France and the UK, if this false flag, is carried out, because that's essentially what it is. It's sending signals to Al-Qaeda, through their, PR representatives, the White Helmets, to launch a fake chemical attack. And the Russian Ministry of Defense has long warned about this in the past 2 weeks, and has even met with the U.S. and provided the details of what they know the U.S. has planned for this provocation that will once again allow the U.S. to attack the Syrian government. Now, there's a lot of crying now about, the impending humanitarian catastrophe. There's civilians there. It's not just Al-Qaeda. That is, of course, true. There are civilians there, a large number of civilians. But this was somehow not a concern for them when the U.S. Military forces and its allies were driving ISIS out of West Iraq. Nor was it a concern when they were invading and seizing control in eastern Syria. We're talking the devastation that we saw in Raqqa, Mosul, Manbij, Kobani. Both Amnesty International and a UN interagency team on the ground in Raqqa after the U.S. conquered the city said that it was the most damaged city in the entire war. Far worse than Homs, far worse than Aleppo. That some 70 to 80% of the buildings were destroyed, and that there were well over 2,000 civilian casualties as collateral damage. So for the U.S. to suddenly, and its allies, to suddenly be crying about, the possible humanitarian catastrophe is just simply, absurd rhetoric and hypocrisy. What they're really worried about is, the last obstacle of what had, been regarded as a rebellion. It was always, a jihad and a proxy war against the Syrian government will be defeated. And Just last week, we saw David Ignatius writing in the Washington Post, quoting an, of course, anonymous Trump administration official that said that their goal in Syria now is to create as many quagmires for the Syrian government and for Russia as possible until we get what we want, which is, of course, regime change. That hasn't changed. And this is just one more example of this rhetoric and flack that are being thrown up, these threats of attacks on the Syrian government. Just in the last 24 hours, the U.S. has suddenly announced an entirely new strategy towards Syria. Trump had once promised that he wanted all of the troops out by the end of the year. He had long campaigned that he didn't see a reason for them to be there, that we were backing jihadists, that we were wasting money, and so on. Well, that has suddenly, at least according to James Jeffrey, the U.S. special representative for Syria — they haven't had an ambassador there for a long time, and saying that Trump is fully on board. And this is just one more indication after the New York Times deep stater outing himself opinion piece, and the Bob Woodward's book. Just one more indication of what we have long known, is that Trump doesn't have control over his own foreign and military policy. And the new U.S. policy is that we are not leaving Syria ever. They have announced an indefinite U.S. illegal, under international law, military occupation of at least East Syria. They said they are not leaving until Iran, all Iranian forces, which are still largely mostly advisors and militia groups they've trained from across the region, leave the country, as if the United States has the right to determine who Syria allies with and who it invites on their own territory, which is of course nonsense. And also, until they say they're not in it for regime change, but until a government is formed in Damascus that is the international community, quote unquote, this euphemism for the U.S. and its allies, agrees, can tolerate this government. So it seems that we're back to square one with the United States before Trump took office. And
yeah. Has the liberation actually begun? I mean, have the operations started? And how would you compare this to the past liberations of other major cities like Aleppo? And there was a lot of resistance and a lot of media reports about how Aleppo was going to be a disaster, and what Assad was doing was illegal, and all these things. So, I mean, it had the same coverage of Aleppo, and now we see a thriving city. Now we see a liberated, thriving city that no one is reporting about for good reasons. So has the fighting actually begun? Has the liberation begun? And how would you compare Idlib, scale-wise and size, to Aleppo? Yeah.
Okay, so Idlib is much bigger, both in terms of the area covered, because it's not solely Idlib province. It also, their area of control, jihadist controls, extends into Latakia and the Hama in the south, and even into parts of western Aleppo province. The size of the jihadist force present is much larger, by a scale larger than we have seen in previous. Also, they're not going to back down here because they really don't have, a lot of them don't have anywhere else to go. There is an area immediately to the northeast, the Jarablus corridor, that is militarily occupied by Turkey, Syrian territory. We could see some movement of some fighters and some of the civilians that are, more of the pro-Al-Qaeda bent attempt to flee into that territory. But the rest of them, a lot of the foreign fighters, they're not going to back down. They're not going to surrender here. And Turkey will probably attempt to close the border to some of them, because Turkey's really in a bind here. They bet on regime change. There is no country that has been more directly responsible for the proxy war on Syria over the last 7 years than Turkey, because without them, U.S., Saudi, Qatari, British, etc., supplies, arms, couldn't reach them. Turkey was the jihadi Disneyland, where they were literally armed, trained, and salaried by what the U.S. euphemistically called moms centers. You know, there was one originally in Jordan, but most of this was done out of Turkey. And Turkey faces a huge refugee crisis now. They're already housing some 3 million Syrians at least, and they face the potential threat of more of civilians leave the fighting in Idlib and flee in. Plus, then they have to worry about blowback from the jihadis that they've been backing for years, including, of course, Al-Qaeda, that will want revenge, that will feel angry that they've been betrayed by Turkey. So Turkey's in a real bind. They're facing another possible terrorist threat to their country. And, you know, this is the inevitable blowback, of course, both the refugees and the threat of Sunni jihadist terrorist attacks. They have created this problem for themselves. We've constantly seen jihadi raids, in the last months, down to the last days, out of this area into Latakia, and makeshift drone attacks on Russian air bases. Why Russia says there is the urgency. You can't just let this sit and fester, because they're constantly attacking out. In the past week, Russia has started resumed bombing. They hadn't bombed for nearly a month in Idlib. They've started resuming that. Turkey had their chance to once again, as all the previous peace deals, ceasefires, truces, they've all failed because the quote good rebels have they've been unable to separate them, because it's impossible to separate them from Al-Qaeda and the other jihadist groups, because there is no distinction from the very beginning. They have been allied all through this, and they so thoroughly dominate the opposition that even if you could magically make every Al-Qaeda loyal member disappear tomorrow, the rebellion, such as it is, would completely collapse. So you can't do that. So we just saw in the last hours a meeting of the Astana agreement. This is the geopolitical waltz. Officially it's Russia, Iran, and Turkey. But really, it's Russia and Iran on one side, and Turkey is there not because they're their partner, but because they represent the enemy. They're the ones supplying the proxies. They're the ones that to deal with. Putin, by doing this, hoped to cut the U.S., the UK, Saudi, Qatar out of this whole process of an end deal negotiations. And to a large extent, that has worked, principally because the U.S. shifted most of its backing to the Kurds, which has really, and the occupation of East Syria, which has really estranged them and made the U.S. and Turkish relations very difficult. So Erdogan balancing has tried to veer close to Russia, but they want to retain control of the Jarablus corridor and install a puppet government there inside Syrian territory. They would like to do the same thing to Idlib. They came to Astana today hoping to get a ceasefire, hoping for more time, as they said, to separate the bad jihadists from the good jihadists. What this really meant is they want more time to try to convince all of Al-Qaeda and the other jihadist groups to officially disband, put on Turkish proxy uniforms, and continue occupying Idlib. Now, that is not a solution to bring peace to Idlib or to Syria in general. And today at the Astana agreement, you saw literal arguments. This was all, the whole thing was actually filmed. It wasn't behind closed doors, between Putin and Rouhani on one side and Erdogan on the other. Rouhani, the Iranian president, said that there cannot be peace in Syria until all the terrorists in Idlib are eradicated, which is specifically what multiple UN Security Council resolutions call for. They say that ISIS and Al-Qaeda and any individual organization or endeavor that is associated with them and their safe havens must be eradicated. And Erdogan tried to say that we can't leave. He talked about the humanitarian catastrophe, how Turkey can't take any more refugees. And he said that we can't leave Idlib to the mercies of the Assad regime, the legitimate Syrian government, completely on a different reality from Putin and Rouhani. And when he asked for a ceasefire, Putin, looked Erdogan dead in the face, and he's like, I don't see a representative from al-Nusra or ISIS in this room. Is there? Quite clearly, saying that it's exactly what Erdogan was. Can you speak for them to get them to lay down their arms? If not, then there's no point in a ceasefire, which has been the point for years now. You can't negotiate with these people. There is no political solution that would see Al-Qaeda and other jihadis in Turkish uniform, a political settlement in a secular, multi-ethnic, multi-confessional Syrian republic. So right now, everyone is trying to decipher what happened at this Astana agreement today. Obviously, no ceasefire was agreed to. It's not immediately clear when and if the Syrian government and Russian offensive to liberate Idlib will begin in earnest. I think that you will continue to see bombing and artillery, possibly some cruise missile strikes in the next few days, an escalation. They will give Turkey a little bit more time to save face. Maybe Erdogan can convince a few of the jihadis, to come over into the Jarablus corridor. But there's a problem there because Al-Qaeda is arresting and, according to their own words, beheading or hanging anyone that are collaborators that will attempt to surrender or go over to the Syrian government or possibly over to the official Turkish proxy forces, the new Syrian army, as they call it, in the Jarablus corridor. But this is not going to permanently forestall the offensive. You've seen too many military forces assembled, and any more time given will give the U.S. times to prepare provocations. We've already seen them trying to start provocations, training up terrorist forces to attack Palmyra, which was stopped by Russia, and these other quagmires that they attempt to create around the country. So you may not see ground operations in earnest start for a few days yet, but it shouldn't lull you into thinking that somehow Putin and Rouhani have backed down. In the end, it will have to be Erdogan that backs down because he's in an untenable position, and perhaps you can feel sorry for him. He's facing the threat of what he calls terrorism from Kurds backed by the U.S. now, coming in from East Syria. And at the same time, he's created this problem with the sectarian, the Sunni jihadists, the Wahhabists, and Islamists, that will either be fleeing Idlib or looking for some payback against someone who has been their patron for this entire proxy war on Syria. But Idlib is where we're going to see this big titanic battle. I mean, you'll still have problems with the Turkish occupation of the Jarablus corridor with their proxies and the U.S. occupation of East Syria with the Kurds, but we've already seen the Kurds start to shift their position more and more towards the Syrian government because they know that the Kurds have been thrown under the bus by the U.S. in the region so many times before that they can't rely on them. So this is the big battle that will determine the fate of the war, and I expect it to be a tough one. They're not going to give up, but still look for it to start in earnest with ground operations within the next 2 weeks.
All right, so it's going to be a tough battle, but do you believe that eventually Assad, Syria, and the Syrian government will liberate and win this battle? They will liberate Idlib in the end, regardless of how long it'll take?
There's no question about that. First of all, Assad will not liberate it. The Syrian people, the millions of Syrian people that support their government, that support their secular, multi-ethnic, multi-confessional republic, they will win. This attempt to boil it down to Assad is a propaganda trick of the West, of course. But yes, eventually the Syrian government will win. It's a question of how much Turkey and the U.S. want to draw this out.
All right. So you mentioned a lot about Turkey. And to close out the segment, Mark, what will the U.S. do? How involved do you think they'll get? Are we looking once again at, there's been a lot of talk about a chemical weapons false flag.
Yeah.
Are we looking at, once again, a few missiles, lobbed into Syria so Trump can save face? Are we looking at something more?
No.
More engaged?
I think now we're seeing deep state far more firmly entrenched in control of Syria policy. They've talked too much on this, impending chemical weapons attack that they see lots of evidence for by the Syrian government to walk back from it now. So that will definitely take place. And they will attempt to use that, and they will launch far more substantial strikes. And there we get really into dangerous territory, because any more substantial strikes raise the potential of killing Russian troops, which are, widely scattered in Syria. And that raises the specter of actual military confrontation in Syria, if by mistake or misunderstanding or, deconfliction not working properly over a false chemical weapon hoax arranged to defend Al-Qaeda in Idlib. It beggars belief, but, they in Washington, they feel so aggrieved that Russia has stolen their regime change in Syria out from them. They believe they have to make Russia suffer. The former acting director of the CIA, Michael Morell, under Obama, said it outright on American TV with Charlie Rose. He said, we need to kill more Russians and Iranians in Syria to make them pay a price. And this type of brinkmanship should, besides, the purpose of defending jihadis and Al-Qaeda and everywhere, as long as they're in Syria, it should scare everyone. But the real threat, of course, is some mistake leading to actual Russia, U.S. or Russia, Turkey with NATO military confrontation here. And I've got a solution. If they want these, Al-Qaeda and friends, Ahrar al-Sham, the Turkestan Islamic Party, the Uyghurs, the Chechen Caucasus jihadists there. If they're so concerned about them, how about we arrange their exit of the country, to Ankara, or Brussels maybe.
Safe passage to Brussels,
Safe passage to London. Let's bring them to Washington D.C. Right? If these are the freedom-loving, moderate rebels you love so much, surely you won't mind housing them in Washington, D.C. for a while, right?
Yeah, that's a solution, and that's a better solution than what's going on right now. That's for sure, because I would like nothing more than to see the swamp deal with these guys, the D.C. swamp.
Yeah, this is going to be Idlib is going to be tough. It's entrenched urban combat against jihadis, holding a civilian population, part of which is sympathetic to them, part of them is not, but, holding them hostage. And you're going to see collateral damage, just like we saw in Raqqa, just like we saw in Kobani and Mosul and Fallujah. But, the U.S., and we see daily in Yemen with, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia military operation there. But, the humanitarian catastrophe will be portrayed as it will be portrayed in the Western media, that acts as the stenographers and the megaphones, for this type of U.S. propaganda warfare will be in earnest. It will be a full scale media onslaught.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot of articles on this, and they've even shifted the narrative. They're not even moderate rebels anymore; they're calling them domestic rebels.
Yeah, it's just amazing. And they all, the horrible thing is they all know it's Al-Qaeda and other jihadists. Yeah. All right, of whatever 31 flavors of jihad, that they find there. But, it's so cynical and so disingenuous for them to be doing this just because they'd rather see the jihadists win or at least do some damage going down than having the Syrian government recontain control of their own country.
Yeah, it is. It's
And
for lack of a better word,
by
disgusting.
Russia and Iran, which they can't
They can't bear that.
Yeah, they created this mess. This is another blowback, another geopolitical foobar, just like Iraq was.
Yeah, that it is. That it is for sure. 7 years and going. Mark Sleboda, International Affairs and Security Analyst, live from Moscow. Thank you very much for your analysis on Idlib and the war to liberate Idlib. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on the notifications bell. Every time we push out a new video, you'll get it. And remember to visit the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt, help support the Duran. Mark Sleboda from Moscow, thank you very much. Until next time, take care.